Hello and welcome back to this Slim DevOps Live episode 10. Hello again, Peter. How you doing?
I'm great. Episode 10. Wow, that makes us feel like old hat at this, huh?
Double digits. You'd think we'd get the music
Double
intro
digits.
right after 10 goes round at this, but there you go.
Nobody expects that.
So, what's new? What have you been up to?
Oh, yeah, we've had a lot going on. It's been a busy week for us. We had some announcements. I posted a story to the news stack. We've just been doing a lot. And then here on the east coast of the U.S., we have a hurricane on the way. So
nice.
See how that goes. But yeah. So, what about you, Martin? What's new with you?
Oh goodness, things are falling over. That's what's new with me. I'm back from vacation. So what is it today? It's Thursday. So I'm 4 days back from having an extended break, which was absolutely lovely. So I was quite surprised at like everything that changed in a week. You know, you go away for a working week and wow. So one of the things that happened, there was a hack fest at work, a whole Friday dedicated to coding.
Yeah, it was super fun. I mean, they even I was even coding. When your growth guy's coding, then you've got a lot going on. But yeah, it was super fun. We we all joined. We did it on Discord, so we were all in Discord in the channel, and we were sharing screen and passing things back and forth and doing all these different iterations. And we're really working on our container profiles for the Slim.AI site. So hopefully people see that coming up pretty soon. But we're generating a lot of data out of scanning our containers and. It was a really cool kind of meetup between our UX teams, our product teams, our engineering teams, of course. And then, even John, our CEO, and Kyle, our CTO, were getting in on the action. And so it was pretty fun. It felt really, really cool. So that was great. But we'll do it again soon.
One of those soon. I feel like I utterly missed out on that opportunity.
Big
working
on the .NET Slimming, not yet.
Yeah, nice Big Pod. I also Big Pod. I know that you are a keen GitPod user, so I'm going to be in touch. Maybe you and I can do a little stream here as I skill up on GitPod, because we're looking to use that for how we present some stuff. So we've got a few things coming up soon. So what's coming up next week, Peter?
Yeah, so as folks in the chat know and requested from us was a little bit of a Containers 101 process. So we're kind of calling this our BYOA, Bring Your Own App. And what we want to put together is we'll do a little bit of I don't know if it's a training or just kind of like a working session, coding session, hackathon, maybe we'll call it. Where we'll build containers out of whatever apps people have. And if you don't have like an app that you're working on, or you don't, you want to do something simple, we'll have some samples that people can use. But the challenge that Martin and I have given ourselves is that any language, any framework that you want to use, we'll be able to help you containerize that app, and we'll do it like a workshop. So that's what we're going to try to do. No promises on .NET for Big Pod there, but we'll do the best that we can. And that'll be next week. So
okay. Bring your own skills as well, because we may not have all the skills available at the time of asking. So, come along. And that will probably be longer than half an hour, that one, because I imagine that we'll get down and dirty with inevitable problems, and we'll try and debug that as we go. And what's up after that?
So then we're going to be doing a Q&A with a couple people. Jillian, who heads up culture on our side, and Jono Bacon, who probably a lot of people know is a community builder or an open source advocate. They're going to come on the show. That's in advance of Jillian's going to be at Open Source Summit, which is again in the fall. So if anybody's going to that, please stop by Jillian's talk. But she's going to be talking about sort of like if you have a popular open source repository and you're thinking about maybe starting a company out of it, this is something that Jillian's helped people with a couple times, and obviously similar to something that we did with Slim and Docker Slim. So that's going to be the nature of the talk, and the talk with Jono and Jillian will be a little bit of a preview of that and a little bit of how to think about some of those things. So that should be a pretty interesting one. So that'll be 2 weeks out from today. So
absolutely. This is something you want to tune in for. What you can learn about, culture and how to run teams in an empathic way is Jillian's specialist topic. And it's, well, frankly, one of the main reasons why I joined Slim, all those months ago, because
same.
Slim are doing it right. Right, so let's get on with probably why most of you are here. We have a special guest, so we'd like to bring in Brendan. Hello, Brendan. How are you?
Oh, I'm just fine. Hi, Martin. Thanks for having me.
This has been a long time in the making. We're delighted to have you here with us. So, Brendan, you're currently working at GitLab. I wonder if you could introduce yourself for the benefit of those people who may not know who you are, who GitLab are, and what you do there.
Sure, yeah. So my name's Brendan O'Leary. I like to say I'm a 1X developer, but a 4X dad, because I got 4 small children. And 1X developer might even be a little generous, but you got to promote yourself, right? And yeah, I work for a company called GitLab. I've been there for almost 4 years at this point. And so GitLab is a DevOps platform that allows you to, of course, do source control management, right? That's where the Git in our name comes from. But kind of the lab part is everything else, right? CI/CD and security and monitoring and planning and portfolio management and all kinds of other stuff that goes into an entire DevOps lifecycle. And so that's what GitLab does. And I've had the privilege of having a number of roles at GitLab. One fantastic thing about us is we've been remote since before it was required by a pandemic. When I started in October of 2017, we had 150-ish people. We now have over 1,400 people in 66 different countries and regions.
Wow.
And so I'm really proud and honored and excited all the time to have colleagues literally all over the world. And it's been quite the ride.
That's astonishing. I had no idea that GitLab had scaled to that many people. Sorry for this reference, but I remember I was in Prague the day that GitHub merged with Microsoft, and I was actually at an Electron Maintainers Summit hosted by Microsoft with most of the DevRel team from GitHub. So obviously, the first morning was kind of a write-off because everyone was just like, what's the hot take on what's going on? And whilst that conversation was rolling out, I was just watching the number of people subscribing and moving repositories to GitLab sort of hockey sticking.
Yeah, there was a big influx of folks that were scared about what that was going to mean for the future. Obviously, GitHub's been around a long time and is where open source lives on the internet. And yes, we had this huge uptick, and our systems were actually doing okay. So I was a little involved that weekend too. And because actually it leaked. It was supposed to come out the week following, but it leaked on a Friday or something like that.
Yeah.
I can't remember exactly when. Some reporter broke their embargo or didn't think they were embargoed.
It broke on a Sunday.
A Sunday, yeah. I knew it was a weekend, and because I have a fun story about that too. But yeah, what was I saying? Oh, our system, GitLab.com, stayed up pretty well, but we have, GitLab is a very transparent company. We build in the open. That's kind of been our MO for a long time. And so there's actually, if you go to dashboards.gitlab.com, you actually get a Grafana dashboard that actually is, now you have to log in to see some data that's sensitive, but you can actually see live production data about the health of our production systems there. And that was just a VM. And it actually was number one above the announcement of the GitHub acquisition was GitLab Spike, and it was just a direct link to the poor little VM with Grafana on it, and it fell over pretty hard.
I mean, that's an interesting story in itself, because one of the things that GitLab have become famous for is sort of complete and utter transparency in how they conduct their operations and then make that information available to their users and community.
Yeah, it's something that kind of made me fall in love with the company to begin with. The story I tell is I was a GitLab user before I was a GitLabber or GitLab team member. And I had a buddy that was getting recruited to go work for GitLab. And he's like, oh, you should look at this company. I'm like, oh, yeah, it's probably a company too, not just the software I've been using. And we were on a beach vacation, my family and I, and it rained most of the time. And I ended up reading a big chunk of GitLab's Handbook, which is public, as you just mentioned, our handbook. And I kept reading this thing like, this is the company I would build if I was building a company. This is unreal. My wife and my parents were like sick and tired of hearing me like quote them from some random company's website that they had never heard of. And I was like, this has to be like written, like massaged by a marketing person, right? Like this is just too good to be true. And like turns out like, no, like that handbook is how we completely operate. And very early on, I was told that very directly. Our CEO, his name's Sid Sabrandi. He's originally from the Netherlands, now lives in San Francisco. I met him early on because I actually was lucky enough to join right before they were getting the whole team together in Crete, Greece. So my second week, I flew to Greece to meet everyone, which was like super lucky in a remote
that must be
company.
Crete
really horrible
place.
Really just, Santorini on a boat one day. It's just hard, right?
Oh,
like,
terrible.
We do. And I knew Sid loved the handbook, so I was like, I'm going to get in good with this guy. But he was very direct, so there's no kind of just dancing around him. And I was like, Sid, I just love the handbook. That's one big reason I'm here. And he goes, that's good, Brendan. So now that you're here, what's written one way, but we do it the other way? And I was like, I don't know. I said, I can find out. He's like, I expect that you do. You can Slack me when you do. He's like, okay. Like fast forward to me, like on my laptop in a hotel room in Greece, like frantically trying to find something my second week that was like wrong. And it wasn't him challenging me. It's just, he wanted the thing to reflect exactly how we really operated. And that's just how he is and how our company culture is. So it's been great.
That's a fabulous story. There are people commenting on that, and if that kind of insight interests you, then do set your calendars for 2 weeks time when Gillian and Jono are going to be diving into this culture topic and backstory like that, and why it works and why it scales. That's what's going to be discussed. So I think something that GitLab and Slim.AI have in common is a focus on developer experience. So can you tell me a bit about, well, first of all, what does developer experience mean to you and GitLab, and why is it important?
That's a good question. I think developer experience can mean a lot of things to a lot of different people. But I think as we see this world that's, being eaten and is really been eaten by software, the ability for developers and software engineers to be productive and feel like they're contributing, and, kind of seeing like the fruits of their work, is really critical, right? It's not it's not an easy physical, it's not software never ends. So it's not easy to like always have a goal and see that you've reached it. You've got to kind of understand how it evolves over time and you're reaching that goal. It's one of the reasons I like to do woodworking on the side, because it's like kind of the opposite of software. It's like a physical thing you make. And so I think that is critical, because competition for developers is going to be more than there ever has been. Competition for developers, time and share of like what they're thinking about is, ever kind of crowded space. And that's what I think has led to the rise of open source software. I think it's what's led to the rise of open source developer tools, right? Because the things that the developers are using to get their job done, if they can contribute to them when they want to fix something down, that's even better. But you also don't want everyone to be building their own thing, right? Because for a long time, that's what everyone was doing around, DevOps or CI/CD, right? Or just kind of, we were all building these DevOps platforms together, or not together. That's the problem. We were all doing it kind of in silos, right?
Yeah.
Story I tell there is, I was working for a healthcare software company, and I was a director of product and also kind of in charge of the engineering team at the time. And I'm walking between the CEO's office and my office, and the server room's in the middle. This is, early 2000s, so there's still server rooms. And the door's propped open, which is a bad sign. And I turn and I look, and there's my lead developer, our new product developer, and he's got a server with a screwdriver in it. And that server was the Redmine server, which is like a issue tracking server. And he didn't know what to work on next because Redmine was down, so he decided to work on the Redmine server itself. And that was kind of when it kind of like dawned on me that like making developers able to work on the things they want to and need to work on is a really critical thing. That was a very frugal business, but the next day on my corporate card with my name on it, there was lots of SaaS software to like get us out of that server room. Right. People thought I was crazy, and I'm like, nope. Every dollar we spend on this is worth maybe infinity dollars on the other side, because we've got to serve our customers and deliver value to them.
That's very early on, that kind of thinking. Long before hosting things elsewhere, making use of software, what we know now as SaaS. That was embryonic back then. It
was very new, and it was actually the Atlassian stack was a big part of what I was doing at the time.
Oh, right.
And I always caveat that when I'm talking about it around Sid, like, well, because GitLab didn't exist yet. Right. That's why we had to go to Bitbucket. But yeah, it was new, but it was critical for us, because we had the server room that if the AC went up in it, now like our developers are ground to a halt, and our customers are all over the country, and they don't really care about that there's a hurricane where we are, or the AC went out, right? We've got to be able to deliver for them. So it's really critical.
Yeah. So I see Eric in the chat is hearkening back to the Redmine days. I have a few Redmine stories of my own. We're trying to use it like on very early cloud, like AWS instances, where I'm trying to set it up just to give my engineers the time to like actually code, and I'm like, but I need to tell you what to do somehow. So even in the cloud era, that was still like something that was like, I don't want to spend engineering time doing this, but we still need a way to communicate. And we had a server room that would overheat when the air conditioning would go out in the building, and those are dark days. So
yeah, I always say now that if you're messing around in the AWS console, that's just a screwdriver in a server still.
Right. And so
it's a cloud screwdriver.
And that's a great point. I mean, I can remember. I did work experience when I was like 16 or something at an IT organization. And one of the guys I was following around that week said to me, never let anyone see you with a screwdriver in the back of a computer. And it wasn't because you shouldn't do that. He was basically saying, I spend my whole life just doing this now. And back then it was, flipping dip switches on Centronic interfaces for printers to make sure they worked properly. He was just like, don't be this person.
Yeah. Oh, tip switches on printer interfaces. Now I'm getting flashbacks.
So if messing around in the AWS console is the equivalent of sticking a screwdriver in a server, what should people be doing in the modern era?
Yeah, well, I mean, I think we see this massive push towards automation, right? It's where you see, this huge uptick in folks focused on the DevOps platform, right? That's where a lot of our strength came from and growth has come from. Is GitLab is having CI/CD integrated right next to it. It's why you see GitHub and GitHub Actions, taking off the way it has. Those kinds of integrating that together and not stitching it together yourself is where we're going. And so that's why you see things like Terraform and HashiCorp doing so well, because the way to do modern software development is to automate every part of that process that you can, from CI to CD to security to understanding how and what you're deploying where. A lot of these systems have become so complex that it's really a lot harder to grok it as a human, and so you need to rely on automation and kind of the processes you've built to understand what the current state is.
Yeah, I mean, certainly we hear a lot about, software-defined networks these days, but really another buzzword that I hear is software-defined everything. And that is hand in glove with sort of that automation story that you're telling there. Really, the days of, manually connecting to a server and, changing a configuration file, if that's what you're doing, and it's your NAS at home, that's fine. But if you're doing any kind of at-scale production systems in that fashion, probably a time to skill up on some of the automation solutions that are out there. So we're here at Slim.AI. We're centered around, container technologies and making containers easier to work with, especially for the developer experience, not just for deploying into production, but sort of the iterative development process, that people are using. How do you think containers have changed, those workflows, and how will they continue to change the way that developers work?
It's a great question. And, I think it's like kind of a cheap answer, but I do think it's true that it's changed like almost everything about how we work and how we deploy code. I think it's really, solved for a lot of problems that we've all had in these days of manually logging in and deploying, or manually having to try and configure continuous integration. A previous role, I had a Jenkins server that I had inherited, right? And on there, for those that do Java programming, you might know there's a JRE and a JDK. It's two different ways to compile. There's Oracle involved. Don't need to get into all that, but there's two different ways, right? And someone had labeled a tool as the JRE, but it actually physically was the JDK binary.
Oh no.
And so we had this flakiness in the builds that was like so hard to figure out. And I end up like shawing the binary on the different server. It was a whole thing. and turns out, it was just labeled wrong. And so that kind of like dependency management, whether it's dependency management in your development environment, right? We were talking about Gitpod earlier, right? Why is Gitpod something that's bringing the container to the developer and putting the developer environment in containers? Well, because at that same job, we had 13 different applications that made up the overall system, and getting a new developer stood up took, I'm not kidding, 3 days. Like you get a new laptop for a new developer, it took 3 days of another engineer setting up the computer.
Yeah.
And then CI, right? So then it comes to building it. It's like, again, you have to have the right dependencies in place. So do you want to try and manage that manually, or do you want to just have a container that has all of the dependencies that it needs in it, that you can then build inside of consistently and the same way every time? And then when you deploy to production, it's even more important that you have consistency, that you know what you're deploying, that you have provenance on what you're deploying. Like all of those things are hard problems to solve in software engineering and deploying code faster, and problems that containers used correctly can really help solve for in a way that virtual machines never did, in a way that a lot of automation tools never have. By really containing the things that you need to do it right? Like to my Java example, the jar is not enough. Like we needed the jar and the right tools next to it.
Yeah, that Jenkins story really strikes a chord with me, because I used to operate, a rather large Jenkins infrastructure. In fact,
I'm sorry.
Yeah, I know. I mean, it felt amazing at the time, but looking back, those workflows to do that CI/CD integration, those were scripts embedded in forms as part of Jenkins, often with no revision control, and usually there was a single point of failure, which was the person that put those scripts into those forms in order to make it all go. So what are some of the challenges that you've seen in CI/CD and the work, and when it comes to sort of developer experience and how that's improved?
Yeah, well, I think, again, I know I'm picking on Jenkins, because I ran Jenkins at one point, so I feel like I have the right to pick on it, and it owes me letting me pick on it.
Never get that time back.
but like you said, it was at the time, it was a great tool for what we had at the time. But as software delivery accelerates, right, we've seen this kind of acceleration of software delivery year over year. In the pandemic, we've seen it even more as folks are, at home. They've got more time to spend. They're unfortunately working more, but they're automating a lot more and spending time on those things that need that. Like our developer survey, I was just rereading it. I think saw that like 56% of people said that they've increased it in the last 12 months their speed of software delivery by two times or more in our developer survey. And so as that speed increases, the things that seem little, right? Like Martin's the only person that understands how this Jenkins setup is set up, or this dependency, we installed it now, and we'll probably need to update it later because it's going to, eventually have a security bug found in it. They seem little at the time. Those add up into this massive technical debt that isn't even the technical debt that's in our code. It's the technical debt in the way we're doing DevOps. And so the more that you can eliminate that's leveraged time, right? And that's why a container, or CI as code, or deployment as code, that's why those things are so valuable to so many of us, because they allow you to iterate on how you do DevOps just as you would iterate on a code feature or fix a bug in the code.
So and you're kind of segueing into something that I think you've become well known for, which is you have presented a number of talks now on sort of the software supply chain, and in particular the risks of the software supply chain. So if that's not a term that people are familiar with, what is the software supply chain? And when we talk about risks, what are the risks and what are the considerations of sort of, modern software development pipelines?
Yeah, no, that's a great question. And it's not something that's very new, but it's something we're hearing about a lot more now, I think. And it's something that I've really focused on the past probably 12, 18 months because of how important it is. I think, again, it's a level of complexity that we've added to software to speed things up, that we have to be careful about kind of not letting it then, make things worse. And so when you say supply chain, right, and it's a traditional kind of manufacturing term, right? You've got raw materials that come in a supply chain, right? And we've seen how disruptions to that can have huge impacts, right? During the pandemic, we had huge disruptions to physical supply chains that have caused shortages of certain goods, right? We had the massive tsunami that happened in Japan years ago, caused massive supply chain issues for a lot of car manufacturers. In fact, I was trying at the time. I've got 4 kids, right? We mentioned that earlier. At the time, I was trying to buy a minivan, and I couldn't get a Honda Odyssey anywhere. There were none. I actually knew someone who worked at, my cousin works for them in parts procurement, and I was talking to him about it, and he said, "Yeah, Brendan, there was a chip that someone made for the computer in the minivan that ran the transmission, and that I said the robot in the room's name. I don't know if you heard that. Anyway, so that supply that disrupted the supply chain. That small thing, right? The weakest link in a chain, right? Calling it a chain lets you talk about then the weakest link in that chain being a major problem. And we've seen that in software, where we had at the beginning of the year last year, we had the SolarWinds Sunburst attack. We've had lots of other supply chain attacks this year, and they're not new this year, but they've kind of been increasing as folks become more reliant on open source software, more reliant on maybe closed source software that they don't really think of as part of their supply chain, right? If it's the software that's managing your servers, well, guess what? That's part of your software supply chain now, right? And so the supply chain is really all of the things that make up, getting your code into production. So that's any computers that are involved, any servers, any other software, open source or closed source or otherwise. That all is your supply chain as you are creating software. And so you have to have kind of a defense in depth mentality of where are all of the different, vulnerabilities that can come from that. We want to have, trust as little as possible, right? We talk about zero trust or other things. You want to have, the least amount of access for every tool or server or person that exists. You want to have, dependency management, so you understand but when, there's a bug in a dependency you're using, right? The Equifax hack, famously was Apache Struts bug that was fixed a year and a half before Equifax was hacked, but they didn't update it, right? And so, and then there's a number of other things, and you were showing Martin a website that I put together that kind of has the talks that I've done and a bunch of resources. It's brendan.fyi/supply chain. And so you have to really think about, what's going into the software you're making, and then where might you be vulnerable? What are the weakest links in that chain?
Yeah.
I think one thing that's where it ties back to the developer experience and what you've been talking to us a lot about, is that like you want to get these things early, whether they're audit, like as dev and ops kind of come closer together, developers are more interested in what's inside, say, their containers. They want to know what the software bill of materials is. They want to know early on if there's security vulnerabilities that they need to know about, but because by the time it gets down into production, it's too late and it costs a lot more and that makes for a bad day for them when their security person comes back, or when their CISO says, do we have Apache struts in our infrastructure? I don't know.
Right.
So you want to know that stuff early. And I think that's something that you've really been pushing on at GitLab, and it's been useful for us at Slim to hear that perspective. And we're building that into some of the tools that we're building.
Yeah, I couldn't agree more, because that's exactly it, right? You pick up the next Apache struts happens, everyone's CISO is going to be on the phone to them in the morning. Where do we have Apache struts? And the answer for a lot of people is, I don't know, right? They don't know if it's included in software they're building. And they, even if they know that, they probably don't know if it's in, a layer of a container they're using, right? Because that's kind of the next frontier in my mind, and why I'm excited about Slim, because these containers are another link in the chain that we haven't traditionally had a lot of insight into. We just kind of grab the Ubuntu container off the internet and then put our code in it and ship that into our production system. Well, there's a lot of question marks in there, right? And you want to be able to answer that question more with better than a shrug of your shoulders,
right,
when it comes.
Indeed. Or let me get back to you in a couple days.
Right. Yeah. You definitely don't want either of those to be the response. You mentioned there being excited about Slim, so it should probably come as no surprise to people that have listened to this discussion, with the sort of depth of experience that you've got in sort of the DevOps space and the CI/CD space, that you are in fact part of the Slim.AI advisory board, which was just announced today. In fact, Pieter, I think that was kind of you queued up all of that hard work, right?
Yeah, and we didn't even do that on purpose. We actually scheduled this Twitch stream before we decided we were going to make that announcement today. But yeah, just want to say welcome and thank you. And you've been on the advisory team for a good long time now. Well, in Slim time period, which is like 6 months is forever, basically, right? So, but yeah, I just want to say thanks for joining us on the team, and it's been really, really cool to have you. I'm wondering maybe for some people in the audience, like, could you talk a little bit about like what being an advisor means? What does that even mean at a company, and specifically, what are some of the things that you're helping us with here at Slim?
Sure. Yeah, no, it's a great question, and I'm, like I said on Twitter, I think I'm super honored. Slim has brought together this great team, which is not surprising to me because, like you said, I've known John for a while, and really excited to talk with John as the CEO, and kind of we connected really quickly. And so in the beginning, it was just kind of him and I talking about the industry, right? That was the advisory board. But now he's put together this great team. Slim's team is growing internally, and he's put together this great set of advisors that you all have brought on. And so now I think it kind of shifts a little to, my advisor role. It changes. I mean, we talked earlier today. It might be, what's going on in the industry. It might be how do we, understand how to get to our customers better, or how to get to our users better. How is this thing that we're building kind of in our box and in our bubble of the world, does that mean anything to anyone outside of it? So I think a good advisory board is made out of folks from a lot of different backgrounds and different companies who can really spend time getting to know what the company they're advising is doing, but also bring their expertise, which then sounds really pretentious because I'm saying expertise about me, but bring their experience
and
to
the
bear.
other 11 people that are part of that team of advisors.
Yeah. Well, that's why, I said earlier, I never thought in my life I'd see my face next to some of the folks that are on the advisory board, but I'm really excited to be there with them.
Well, welcome. And your, skill and insight is most welcome.
Yeah, it's been really great to have you so far and getting to know you, and hopefully we'll have you back on Twitch here with us sometime soon. So I do know that we are going to have to stop in a couple minutes. So just for the chat, are there any questions out there? I know got a couple people talking about their experiences with Jenkins, so it sounds like we're all not alone with those, and a lot of good shout outs for GitLab CI and what an amazing tool that is, and how much that's improved. So I know Eric made a mention. Yeah, no, go ahead, Martin.
I was just going to say, yes, we've had several people commenting, as you say, Peter, their war stories of Jenkins, and then, their love affair with GitLab CI, which I can echo as well. I worked at Canonical in a past life and ran the robotics team for a short while. And we moved all of the CI/CD pipeline to a self-hosted GitLab instance because GitLab runners were just awesome source. It was particularly for something complicated like the robotics operating system. It was just what we needed.
And it looks like we do have a question from Ollie who wants to know, what are you asking here, Ollie? Yeah, is there anything in the works to address bot spam forks and pull requests? I'm not sure I totally understand the question, but
yeah, it looks like you're running. They're running a self-hosted GitLab, and having troubles with spam pull requests or issues. I would say, yeah, that is a danger to running in the open. And it is something that we've dealt with ourselves. We're no stranger to that. And so there are a number of features we're working on around that, specifically adding an anti-spam engine directly into our Omnibus install, which is how most folks install the self-hosted version of GitLab, and then it'll come to the other ways of installing GitLab as well. Because that's something that our teams have been working on a lot. So there's a lot of different ways to spam, right? There's spamming of issues, spamming of forks, spamming of CI minutes. We've seen huge uptick, and you've seen most folks that run a public CI service talk about how kind of Bitcoin mining is this massive problem for folks. It's been not enjoyable to run free compute for people when that happens. And yeah, so yes, there's some issues. If you want to find me on Twitter, I can send you those exact issues. I'm at O'Leary Crew on Twitter. Happy to do that. I know we've worked with another large open source group, the GNOME Foundation, as kind of the first user of this, because they run a large open source self-hosted version of GitLab as well. But I'd love to get your feedback as well and get you all involved in that so that you can know.
Pretty cool.
Right. Well, thank you for that question, Ali. Hopefully that's answered it. There's stuff coming. I know, Brendan, you've got a hard stop. We're a couple of minutes over, so I'm sorry for that. But you will find Brendan where? Where can people find you, Brendan?
Yeah, so you can find me at brendan.fyi or on Twitter, and that'll probably send you to this site here, which then will tell you probably to come find me on Twitter. That's the best way to get in touch with me. I'm at O'Leary Crew, OLEARYCREW, no apostrophe, on Twitter, and you can find me there. And my DMs are wide open, and also you can just tweet at me directly. Like I said, we build in the open, so happy to have a chat in public too.
Well, thank you very much for joining us. I will keep the goodbyes brief because I know you have to go, but thank you very much. And I think we'll get you back on again. I think there's a couple of conversations we can dig into in a bit more detail. So
for sure.
Thanks very much. Welcome to our advisory board, and I look forward to speaking to you again soon. Sorry for running.
Thanks so much, Brendan.
No problem. It's just my one-on-one with my boss, and I texted him. So
Oh, then we'll keep going.
This
He's
isn't
not
recorded or on the internet forever or anything.
I'm doing
I
my
can
job.
edit
You
that
know,
bit
it's
out.
okay.
Yeah,
The bit that
yeah.
goes
This
to
is,
YouTube,
we're
I'll
talking
edit that.
GitLab, so points. Thank you so much, Brennan. This is awesome.
Yep,
Yeah,
no problem.
thanks very much, everyone. And same time, same place next week. We'll be back again, Peter and I, with our Container 101. We need to skill up fast on a whole bunch of languages and ecosystems so we can, answer all of your questions and containerize your stuff. So pick your own.
I've got a bunch of data I want to share with our podcast as well that we got out of the hackathon. So keep an eye out for that. Maybe we'll do a Twitch on that soon. So
yeah. So thanks very much for coming, everyone. Same time, same place next week. Slim.AI is the URL above me. If you want to get in touch and you've got questions, then in that link in the footer, you'll find our Discord. If you join the Discord, it will tell you where our discourse is, which is community.slim.ai. So get in touch. Things are about to get interesting, especially as we ramp up to the Open Source Summit and also KubeCon later in the year. So we're going to be putting on a whole bunch of stuff, which hopefully you'll all find interesting and useful.
Wonderful.
Right. Well, with that, I think it just remains to say thanks very much for coming, and we'll speak to you soon. Join us in the community places above if you have questions.
All right. Thanks, everyone.
See you next week.